my name is Heejung Chung. I'm Reader in Sociology and Social Policy here at the University of Kent. Today I'm going to talk to you about flexible working and gender equality, whether flexible working can really enhance gender equality or not. As many of you know, there is still a lot of gender inequality, both at home and in the labor market. Women still carry out double, if not triple, the amount of cooking and cleaning and childcare, to the point where even the most egalitarian of societies, we still see approximately an hour or two difference between the unpaid work men and women carry out. And possibly due to that, or related to that, there is a persistent gender pay gap. At the European average, women earn 16% less than men, and in the UK, that percentage could go up to approximately 20%. So women only make approximately 80 pence to the men's pound. And some recent studies have shown that the 22 most richest men in the world own more wealth than all of women in Africa combined together. Now, lots of governments have been trying to tackle this gender inequality problem through various means. One of the most popular policies that have been introduced in recent times is flexible working. The UK government has expanded the right to request flexible working for all workers in 2014. Last year, the European Commission passed a legislation on work-life balance directive, which includes the right to request flexible working. In addition, many companies introduced flexible working policies in their companies, not only to increase diversity, especially in the upper echelons of the companies, but also to make sure that they retain and recruit very high-skilled female workers. Now the question is, can flexible working really reduce gender inequalities at home and in the labor market? I had my daughter in 2012, and 6 months later, I had to go back to work because of some of the work that was kind of piled up whilst I was on leave. Now, the only way I could go back full-time was because of flexible working. So I sometimes took care of my daughter whilst slightly working while she napped or played carefully during the mornings, or had a babysitter come and help out. And she was in nurseries between 1 and 5 o'clock. And in the evenings, we'll pick her up, and then I'll tag team, and her dad will take care of her while I try to pick her back up on work. So I'll work in the evenings and also try to make up during the weekends. Now, if it wasn't for my ability as an academic to work pretty much whenever and wherever I wanted, I don't think I would have been able to come back to work full time. Whilst working on flexible working for more than a decade, I have heard so many stories about how flexible working enabled women, especially women who have become mothers, to maintain their jobs after childbirth. Women who could work from home and didn't have to do those very long commutes. Women who had flexible schedules so they could do what we call tag team parenting, so that mom does kind of the mornings, dad does the afternoons and evenings. Now, I have heard so many of these anecdotes and wanted to see if this was actually the case for a larger group of women across the population. So I looked at this data called the Understanding Society, a longitudinal household data where we collect data from not just the individual but the household year on year. So we could kind of track through what happens not only in their labor market positions but also their lives and families. And we tracked a number of women who gave birth around a similar period of time to see whether, in fact, flexible working, that is having more control over when and where you work, can help women stay in the labor market and not go into part-time jobs. This was especially important because many studies have shown that, especially in countries like the UK, women moving into part-time jobs is possibly the biggest reason why there is a gender pay gap, because part-time jobs were bad, and in a way, slightly exaggerating, a career suicide. What did we find? We found that those women who did not have the ability to work flexibly, approximately 50%, more than 50%, had reduced their number of hours by more than half a day a week. for those mothers who had the ability to use flexi time or work from home, that number was only half. So in other words, flexible working enabled many, many women to maintain their possibly higher earning but slightly longer hour jobs, which has a huge implication towards the gender pay gap. Similar studies have been found in other countries such as Germany and in the US, where flexible working enabled women to stay in high-paying yet stressful jobs. What is more is that using the UK data, we found that lots of mothers were dropping out of the labor markets after the birth of their first child, approximately a quarter or so. But those women who had the ability to work flexibly, they were significantly less likely to drop out of the labor market. So that's all great, isn't it? So flexible working keeps women in the labor market. Hooray! Not quite that simple. I'm going to tell you another story. The second story is about a woman, not myself, with 2 children and a partner. She had a lot of flexibility at her job, so the flexibility to work whenever and wherever she wants. Her partner commuted approximately 1 hour each way, so 2 hours a day, but also didn't have as much flexibility. And what she told me was that because her job had the flexibility, she was expected to take care of her children or do the pickups and drop-offs much more often because she had the flexibility, right? And this was especially problematic during children's half-term, where she was the one supposedly responsible to take care of the children while he worked. I've heard also other women talk about how working from home, other people expected them to do a lot of care work and housework. That because, oh, if you're going to be working from home anyways, can you just, et cetera, et cetera. This has been shown in a huge number of qualitative and now quantitative studies that show that when women work from home, because of the social normative views about men and women's roles in society, women are expected to carry out more housework and childcare. Many studies have shown that when women work from home, they do more housework and childcare. A recent German study has shown that compared to mothers who don't work from home, mothers who work from home do approximately 3 hours more childcare. Now, this is not the case for fathers. The reason why is because we expect men to do the breadwinning, and what men do with the blurred or flexible boundaries is to actually carry out more work. The same German study has shown that when fathers are able to work flexibly or work from home, they did more overtime hours. Now, as I said, flexible working may enable women to stay in the job, but also may push women to do more housework. And what is the consequence of that? The third story is of a friend of mine. She also has a lot of flexibility in her schedule. She picks up her children at 3 o'clock from school and has done so for more than a decade. She kind of makes up for that by working in the evening, so pretty much every day from 8 to 11. She's been doing that for a decade. What does that mean? She has very little sleep, and a lot of mothers could relate to this. Similar to this, we have studies now show that mothers with 2 or more children face a lot of mental health issues. A recent study by Carl Booker and colleagues have shown that mothers with 2 or more children have high levels of biomarkers of stress. Now, mothers who work part-time, that stress levels were a bit reduced. But those mothers who had the ability to work from home or have flexible schedules, the stress levels didn't really reduce that much, again, because it seems like they're doing more of both. There's another story as well, is that a lot of women who are using flexibility to carry out both the household and work responsibility may experience career penalties. This is what we call the flexibility stigma. The idea that those who are working flexibly, especially for care purposes, are somewhat not as productive or make more work for others and will face penalties in terms of promotions or salary increases. In the most recent data we have of the UK, we found that more than a third of workers believe that flexible workers make more work for others. What is more, approximately 40, even up to 50% of men have said that they have suffered some sort of negative consequence to colleagues working flexibly. Again, a flexibility stigma against those who are using flexibility to balance work with family life. So in combination, what we find is that although flexible working can help women to stay in employment and maintain their jobs, it may end up with them doing more housework, childcare, and experiencing negative career consequences. But all is not lost. Contexts matter. Studies have shown that countries like Sweden, where there are much more progressive gender norms about men and women's roles, and there are very good national policies that encourage fathers to take a much more active role in childcare and housework, flexible working can lead to kind of equal outcomes for both men and women. A study has shown that in Sweden, both men and women increased the number of housework hours equally when working flexibly in Sweden, whilst in Poland, where gender norms and policies are not as egalitarian, the gap is much larger. Furthermore, studies have shown that in companies where flexible working is much more widespread, that these negative consequences of flexible working, such as flexibility stigma, doesn't exist as much. Why? Because everybody's working flexibly, and flexibility is the norm. So what does this all tell us? Flexible working can be a great way to reduce the gender inequalities in the labor market. But introducing on its own is not going to be enough. What do we need? We need additional policies to change some of the normative ideas about whose responsibility it is to take care of children and do the breadwinning. Policies such as shared parental leaves or earmarked paternity leaves to encourage fathers to spend a lot of time taking care of children in the early years of a child's life can be a great way to try to equal that balance between men and women in the amount of care they do. We need to encourage more men to take up flexible working for family purposes. As mentioned, it is women that still do flexible working to meet family and work demands, while men are still hesitant. And to change that, one great way of doing it, make sure the senior men are involved. If senior men role model to show that having a better work-life balance could actually lead to better performance outcomes, other men will follow. But more importantly, we need to really change the perceptions of what flexible working is and what it can do for companies. It isn't such a policy just to help gender diversity. It is a performance tool. We see that flexible workers and workers with better work-life balance are more committed, motivated, loyal, and thus more productive. So if we are able to ensure workers have better work-life balance through flexibility, but also through other means, we will have a much better performing companies. And also, this is a way for us to really meet some of the challenges in the future labor markets. Thank you for listening.